Hey booktube, welcome back to another one of my videos, and today I'm going to be talking about how to get more into reading and what books I recommend for people who are just starting out with their reading journey. I'm going to try and give some recommendations in different genres as well, just to make sure that I'm kind of covering a wider variety of taste and style, because I know not everybody wants to read fantasy, but not everybody wants to read romance either. I also don't have physical copies of a lot of these books. They're on my Kindle and my cat is ripping up my tripod. But I do have some initial tips that I just have for getting into reading and making sure that you actually stick with it. So the first thing is you definitely have time to read. I promise you do. I've always been kind of a reader and enjoyed reading, but I started reading a lot this January, and I was a full-time student and I had a full-time job, and I still managed to do it, and I read some pretty hefty books as well. Make sure that you're not comparing yourself to others and how quickly you're reading, because reading is reading. Even if it takes you a month to get through one book, you are still reading and you're still having that's still an accomplishment. Another tip I have, which I feel might be not a popular tip, is don't start out by reading a series. Yes, a series might get you to read more books in the long run, but I know a lot of times when I start reading a series, it feels really daunting because it feels like there's a lot of pressure to read however many books are in the series. So I wouldn't recommend starting with a series, or if you do, because I do have one series recommendation that I'm going to talk about, do something that's a trilogy or a duology, something that's going to be a lot shorter. Don't take on A Court of Thorns and Roses for your first go at a series, or Throne of Glass. Or really just don't take on Sarah J. Maas at first. Next is don't be afraid to get involved in booktube and book talk. Look up the hashtag book talk, or if you look up the hashtag book talk on TikTok, you will find a lot of really great recommendations, and you can find people who might have the most similar taste to you and they can make more recommendations. I also love watching booktube, obviously, because I love watching bookshelf tours and things like that, and that can really inspire you to read and get you excited about certain books. And then my last tip is, I know books are expensive and I cannot justify buying a lot of books, so I always recommend, especially if you're starting out, do ebooks. They're typically a lot cheaper, and I like that I can see my progress with reading on here, and it tells me my streaks and all that, so I like that with my Kindle app. I also have an app called Libby that I feel not enough people talk about. Libby is connected to your local library, and they have ebooks, and you can actually rent ebooks completely for free. You just have to get a library card, and most of the time you can do that online. So definitely download Libby. I will link it down below because, like I said, I feel not enough people take advantage of it. So now getting into some of my book recommendations. And I'm going to segment this into genre, but first I'm going to start with thrillers and mysteries. Also, anytime that you are going to read a new book, I recommend going on Goodreads and taking a look at the trigger warnings or content warnings, just to make sure that it's something you're comfortable with reading. Especially when I'm talking about mysteries and thrillers, there can be some sketchy content in there. First, I have to recommend my favorite book of all time, which is Dark Places by Gillian Flynn. A quick synopsis. So Libby, her family was brutally murdered, and her brother were the only people who survived. But she has no idea who killed her family, but a lot of people suspect it was her brother. And it's kind of her journey figuring out who actually murdered her family and what happened. You get a lot of different point of views. It's phenomenal. I love this book so much. I've read it probably 3 or 4 times. Highly recommend. And it's really fast paced, and that's why I recommend it for getting into reading, because it will keep you reading. Next, I'm recommending In a Dark, Dark Wood by Ruth Ware, which is, it's been a while since I've read this one, to be honest. This one is going to have my quickest synopsis, and it's a bachelorette party gone very, very wrong. Once again though, it really keeps you flipping through the pages and it keeps you hooked. And then my last mystery or thriller recommendation is Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell. This one I've seen a lot of people talk about recently, so I think it's actually getting a little bit more attention than it had when I first read it. My synopsis for this is basically just that this book is very suspenseful. You will not be able to put it down because you have to figure it out. It is so suspenseful. They give you so much like crazy information that you're gonna be like, there's no way. There's no way. So I really love this book. For fantasy fans, I have a couple recommendations, and these ones actually are series, which I know I said I wouldn't necessarily recommend, but they're really good. So the first one I'm gonna recommend is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This one is a trilogy, so you're not taking on too much, and the books are fairly short. Super, super great, enemies to lovers, really fun, fast-paced. I really love The Cruel Prince, and I always recommend it. And if you are a part of Book Talk, you've definitely seen it 1,000 times. For fantasy, I don't have a lot of recommendations because fantasy books are typically dense. There's a lot of world building, and it takes you a minute to get into it. And I'm not going to recommend a book like Crescent City to a new reader or somebody who's just looking to get into it, because it's going to feel very defeating to read a book like that in your first scale. So lastly, I have some romance book recommendations, and I feel like this is going to be the most obvious of recommendations because I am going to recommend It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover, Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover. I reluctantly recommend Verity by Colleen Hoover. Verity is creepy, has a lot of stuff that you should look at content warnings for before you take that one on, but it is a really good book. But I love those books. Those books really are great, and that's why I recommend them. It's not just because they're Colleen Hoover. I just genuinely really like those books. I will say Reminders of Him and November 9 are not books I recommend because I didn't like them that much, which is a very unpopular opinion, but y'all are coming here for my opinion, so that's it. I think they're very basic, stereotypical, not that great. I thought Beach Read by Emily Henry was also a pretty good book, pretty fun, fast-paced, kept me going through it, but I actually didn't finish. I DNF'd that book, but only because my library loan ran out and I didn't care. Like, I was in a reading slump and I did not care. But I do like that book and I would recommend it. At the end of the day, my recommendations are probably pretty basic and authors you've heard 1,000 times, but there are reasons that you've heard about those books and authors 1,000 times, and that's because they're good. They're good, they work, they get you into it. At the beginning of the year, the first book that I read was The Silent Patient by Alex Michealides, and Verity by Colleen Hoover, and those are the books that really got me started and hooked on reading. So those are some of my tips and my book recommendations for people who are just getting into reading or want to get more into reading. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope that you guys go pick up some of my recommendations. I will link them all in the description so that you guys can check them out and maybe pick them up if you're interested. If you have some good recommendations, definitely link them down below and let people know. I will see you guys next week. Bye!